A new guilty verdict for the murder of George Floyd is renewing calls to pass a reform bill literally named after him.
As we stand together to make sure that President Biden knows we are all going to walk together to get the George Floyd Justice and Policing Accountability Act made into law.
Today, there are signs of possible change because more Americans do agree, and this is documented, that this system isn't fair, that the drug war failed in many ways, and many Americans see how racism endures. But the push to reform America's justice system requires some understanding of how we got this system in the first place. Why is it broken? If America's about to try to reform something as big and intractable as our criminal justice and prison system, then you should know where it came from. This modern prison system grew out of a racist Jim Crow framework. It grew out of American policing that used a punitive crackdown on inner cities, which is measurably harsher than almost all other countries like the United States, like other democracies. And many of these more recent controversial and harsh approaches to crime, they were passed by both parties. In the 1990s, then candidate Bill Clinton cast himself as tough on crime and made a point of flying home to oversee an execution.
I'm just going home.
You going to Arkansas?
Yeah, we've got an execution tomorrow, and I always spend all day on those days at the mansion.
Then, as United States president, Clinton led the push for a crime bill that was bipartisan. It was a Democratic president with many top Democrats pushing it. It passed the Senate 62-38. Now, some liberal Democrats in the House and many CBC members did oppose that bill and that approach. But this isn't some ancient history from long ago. Some of the most powerful Democrats in office today were there then, and they were for it, and they were touting how tough those policies would be.
The plan is tough. It is fair. It will put police on the street and criminals in jail.
If you want to do what our constituents are pleading with us to do, which is make the streets safe, tough laws on punishment, smart laws on prevention, you will vote for this.
This bill would have put more police on the street, would have locked up violent offenders, would have given more prison construction money. It's a very well thought out crime bill.
More cops, more prisons, more physical protection for the people. You must take back the streets.
Clinton, Schumer, Biden, they were all together on this plan. And that 94 crime bill funded 100,000 new police officers. It plowed $12 billion into this prison industrial complex. It cracked down on even one-time lesser cases, like trying to charge children as young as 13 as adults, and it added new life sentences for people who were caught on a third crime. Now, today we hear a push away from over-policing and from many of those kind of lengthy prison sentences. But that's what the 94 bill was about. And everyone, we need to learn from history, everyone at the time saw it as and said out loud that it was a super police-friendly bill. Then Senator Biden spoke about that at the presidential signing ceremony.
I've had the total support of every one of the police organizations in this place since I've been a senator. Bob Scully's the only guy that listened to me. This guy is the best friend the cops are ever going to have. Mr. President, you're more conservative than I am on the enforcement side of this legislation.
They will, or a portion of them will, become the predators 15 years from now. And, Madam President, we have predators on our streets.
When there was talk among my group that we put less money in for prisons, I got a call. No bill unless there's more money for prisons.
More money for prisons. Biden was describing the call from then-President Clinton. And they'd go on to tout that bill. Biden called it the Biden crime bill as recently as 2015. Now, today as president, Joe Biden is leading on a very different approach. And it can be a sign of strength to change your mind or change your plans when the results demand it. The factual history remains relevant. And while parts of this crime bill have not aged well, other parts have actually proven vital. Now, I'm not here tonight to oversimplify complex, multi-decade national policy or to try to pick sides. If you watch The Beat, you know we try to present evidence, give you the story, you'll make up your own mind. But in the interest of the full story and context, Joe Biden's also said something very specific over the years about that controversial bill. How the 94 bill also included the most progressive national legislation ever to specifically confront and combat violence against women. And that's true. And at that same ceremony where we heard that talk of getting tough and more prison money, you can also hear then Senator Biden's passion on getting that progressive reform into law.
I have never been more emotionally committed. I have never been more desirous of an outcome than I have been on one aspect of this legislation, and that is the violence against women legislation.
Now, it's the other parts of the 94 bill that made the justice system so harsh. We've seen an explosion of new prisons at the state and federal level, every 15 days on average. Populations there increasing 40%. And state policies that show racism in the death penalty, those 3-strike rules, turns out, over time, they were overwhelmingly used against minorities. And that talk of tough treatment for kids in general, well, it wasn't for kids in general. It was used and mostly only applied to young black people in this country, black people under 18. Now, it took time, but even those so-called life sentences weren't always life sentences because under pressure and under the results and the evidence that I'm saying we need to know about as we go forward, some of them dissipated because states or judges second-guessed why, in this rush to be so harsh and to fill the prisons and to fund the prisons, why should a drug offense land someone in prison longer than even a murder?
Edward Douglas, who was sentenced to life after 3 drug convictions and was just released.
The day that I found out, I just cried. I was just overwhelmed. 16 years is a long time, to spend in jail.
That's a long time no matter what. Definitely a long time for nonviolent drug offenses. And offenders weren't just stuck in jails because of what they did. This is fundamental. It was because of also what politicians did. And some of those politicians are retired. Others are still in office. Some have responded to the failures of this system by embracing reform, what I talked about, the strength of being able to change your mind. Others are still doubling down on mass incarceration today. Many Republicans right now are trying to prevent even a debate and vote on this George Floyd bill in the Senate. It's the Mitch McConnell strategy for most things that are pushed by the other party. Just block it. While also, again, when I talk about complexity and evidence, also it's worth noting that there is at least one Republican senator now stepping out saying it's time to negotiate on some parts of the George Floyd Act with a veteran CBC leader.
I am hopeful because the group of people where we've been having just informal discussions are very sincere, and it's a bipartisan group, and I believe that we want to make something happen.
I think we are on the verge of wrapping this up in the next week or two, depending on how quickly they respond to our suggestions.
That's a Republican talking about his suggestions to what is this main Democratic Floyd bill, which has key reforms that include something police staunchly oppose right now. Among this list of reforms, it would also limit their automatic legal immunity. Many leaders saying now is exactly the time to seize the momentum from the attention on that single case and do something with impact to prevent future tragedies.
Say his name! George Floyd! Say his name! George Floyd! Say his name! George Floyd!
We are hopeful that today will be the catalyst to turn the pain, the agony, the justice delayed into action.
Today just marks the beginning of a new phase of a long struggle to bring justice in America.
There's no question that struggle is long. Now, you can go all the way back to Shakespeare for the fundamental truth that what's past is prologue. America's past is the baseline for this system right now and the baseline for these problems. That means slavery, the Civil War, the slave codes, It means Jim Crow. And correctly, we hear a lot about that. But sometimes it's easier to reckon with the ancient past than the living, recent past. Because when I say the past is prologue, it also means our recent living history. A crime bill that many current members of Congress backed. A push to jail even nonviolent offenders for life. A push to plow money into prisons and then brag about who has the tightest bond with the police unions. So when you start hearing that politicians are now negotiating on this new bill and this rare window for maybe changing something, and they're meeting about their suggestions to improve it, keep your eye on the exact facts. Be rightfully skeptical given what we know about all of this. And what do we know? Well, this is not a system that's worked very well or very transparently. It is under serious pressure now. But its baseline, its resting place, its premise has been to back the police basically no matter what they do. And when it's exposed in public, to basically back state violence, to very literally put police and prisons above people. Careful listeners may recall the freedom fighter who said, very simply, 400 years and it's the same philosophy. That's too true too often. And as I mentioned, depending on how you think about it, some people try to take that and use the ancient history to give our recent American failures a pass. But that crime bill is just approaching about 30 years old. It's still on the books today. 30 years, and it's also that same philosophy unless we change it.
Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.